Hello and welcome to The World Today. We're going to return to the subject of Libya. Mainstream television has this odd habit of prioritizing countries that have been invaded and occupied prior to the invasion, occupation, and bombing raids, and then forgetting about them. But Libya is still in a mess, even though the coverage has been very muted in most of the world's press. There is talk and action being mooted by the Western regimes, led by the United States, to try and sort Libya out. That is, to try and find a regime in Libya which at least has the trappings of a proper government, rather than unruly militias wandering around the country. To aid this PR offensive, businessmen are found, or to be frank, jokers disguised as businessmen, are often found put in charge of huge funds, then removed. Several months ago, Arabian Business, a leading magazine of the Gulf, which specializes in covering business deals, had a cover portrait of a new savior for Libya. Meet Hassan Buhadi, they said, the man tasked with straightening out Libya's $67 billion sovereign wealth fund and changing the fortunes of a stricken nation. Changing the fortunes of a stricken nation. Its fortunes remain the same. It'd be interesting to have a look at the bank accounts of Mr. Buhadi and where some of the money is. We won't find out at the moment. There's a court case going on in London in which Buhadi is contesting his removal as the chairman of this huge investment fund with someone who's appointed to replace him. So Libya exists on three different levels. There's the reality of what is actually going on in the country. There is rubbish like this, which is promoted in the business press, usually written by English journalists, I have to say. And then there are the plans of the West for Libya. With me is Professor Mabruk Derbesh. I described him the last time he came and spoke with us as a professor in exile. He used to teach at the University of Tripoli, and he remains in exile, a close follower of the events that go on in his native country. Mabruk, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us now, since we last spoke, you painted at that time an incredibly gloomy, depressing picture of what was going on in Libya. Libya was a country completely divided by rival groups of militia, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, native versions of one or the other, combined versions of the both, and they controlled the three key cities in the country. Where are we now?
In reality, as you mentioned, Libya lives in different dimensions. Nothing much have changed. There have been change of actors here and there, but the situation has actually gotten worse since our last interview. Libyan people now strive to get bread so they can eat. Banks have no liquidity at all. Banks are being bankrupt by policy and by neglect, both. And Libyans are not able even to go to the bank and get their own money out of it.
So how do people live?
Most people know this. Libyan society is a very a community society where families rely on each other a lot. So one has money, gives the other one, and they live in a family environment. Like there is no single people live in their own. Everybody lives with his or her family. So that's how people really survive. But a lot of people are barely surviving. A lot of people have gone in the street and said, we're hungry. You know, I mean, this is something really unique for Libyan. individual to go in the street and say, I'm hungry, I can't feed my children, and bring their children in the street and say, you know what, you guys do something to them. So the situation is very, now is very, very dangerous. And it's, I mean, this is not just my opinion. The UN has, a couple of months ago, stated that Libya is going through one of the most, or the most dangerous human crisis in the region today. So this is an oil-rich country, and a lot of UN agencies now, they're bringing some medicine to Libya worth $1 million. Libya used to give this in its day to African countries. And this is what Libya used to give in one day. So this is the one thing the UN has accomplished, is bring in some medicine for cough or something for cold. So yeah, to sum it up, really, the situation hasn't really gotten any much better.
And politically speaking, Mabruk, the same groups control the same territories?
Yeah, there's something important about the actors in Libya today, the ones who run the country, basically based on militias. The rule of Libya is the gun today. If you want to become a head of a bank, you have to bring your militias, they can put you there. You want to be the head of a university, you bring your militia and they will put you the head of the university. This is how bad it is. Well, Libya used to have one government in Tripoli and another government in the east, in Tobruk. And between those two governments, there is another government outside of Libya has been inserted or instituted by the UN. And it seems to be better than the two of them.
Where is it based?
Where is it based? Well, it used to be based in Tunisia, and now they just try to come to Libya, but they were not allowed to come through the airports because the airports are controlled by the militia. The militia is run by Al-Qaeda, the one in Tripoli, which is the head of it. It's Mr. Belhaj, who used to be a Guantanamo Bay. He's a Guantanamo Bay graduate. So they were smuggled in Tripoli, and they're protected. Some say they're protected by French troops, or some say other troops, British. There's not much news about this, like in details. But now they're trying to get things together in Tripoli and trying to take some of the governing authorities from the other factions in Tripoli.
The Tripoli faction.
The Tripoli faction, and but they're doing it the wrong way. The official parliament in Tripoli has not really approved this government. So this government is actually appointed by UN, bypassing the parliament and all that. I mean, this is what the democracy they're trying to insert in Libya. This is what they're telling the people. You can have a government that is not approved by the parliament. So it's really an ironic situation in Libya that's almost laughable.
And Belhaj, he is the Libyan who was handed over by British intelligence to the Gaddafi regime and was tortured by that regime. And he was even at one point threatening to sue the British government for having handed him over. And he now appears dressed in a Armani or some other posh suit on CNN and is interviewed by their top announcers and interviewers. And what are they trying to do with him? Is he the choice now of the United States as the most likely candidate to become president and try and unite the different factions behind him?
Well, they kind of moved away from that a little, but I mean, I think he's the backup plan. He's a man who was not tortured in Libya, by the way. It's many accounts. I have talked to many people about it and asked, and everybody have stated that he was not tortured. He was part of the rendition program. And with the rendition program is, ironically, Gaddafi requested Guantanamo Bay, the Libyans in Guantanamo Bay. He hated the Americans so much, he didn't want them to be in an American prison. This is when you know Gaddafi's mentality and you study him, you know that this is really part of his psyche. He was put in a villa with his wife and everything. He wasn't even like in a, I mean, his wife was, he was in prison, but he was living comfortably. And the videos now show that he was living comfortably. I mean, he is a billionaire now. He owns an airline, and he's Qatar's man in Libya. He controls the main airport in Libya, and he is basically the godfather of most of the Islamists movement, terrorist groups in Libya. There's so many of them. You know, there's ISIS and its cousins, and the cousins are worse.
The cousins are locals.
The cousins of ISIS. I mean, Al-Qaeda, Nusra, all these ones. When you control the airport, you control who can come in to Libya. And there's so many foreign fighters in Libya now, mostly from Tunisia. I mean, they come from poor family in Tunisia, and they've been given money to their families in Tunisia. And they've been hired. He is, Belhaj. Belhaj and Qatar.
They're recruiting Tunisians.
Yeah, they're recruiting poor Tunisians to come to Libya, and poor Somalis, and poor Eritreans, and poor Sudanese, and Egyptians to come to Libya because, I mean, these are committing suicide bombs. So Libyans, they're not really this typical suicide bomber. You never hear about a Libyan suicide bomber, very rarely. But you hear a lot of Tunisians who really, you know, do these things. So it's a different mentality, a different way of thinking.
But Mabruk, tell me, the three big militias that control Libya today are under whose leadership and under whose command?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's very important now, today, because just when bringing this government, the new government appointed by the UN, it's with its prime minister named Sarraj. He's the weakest link in the old parliament, so they brought him in because nobody really disagreed with him. We will see if it's a good decision or a bad decision. They created something called the Presidential Council. The Presidential Council now, it's going to be led by somebody's name, Abdurrahman Swihli. He is from the city of Misrata, one of the heavily weaponed militia, and one of the strongest militias in Libya. So he's now the head of the Presidential Council, and also he oversees those militias. And he oversees another militia in Tripoli, which is the most powerful militia in Tripoli. So this is how you see how things are, like a little bit more complicated for maybe the average listener, but it shows the moral bankruptcy of the world community when it comes to Libya. And it shows how little they think of the Libyan people, how really the article, the decree 1973 and 70, these were all just to show and to just destroy the
I mean,
state.
it's not the world community, it's the United States and the European Union countries,
Right.
France and Britain in particular, which have gone in. So we shouldn't call them a community. They represent basically their own and American interests in the region.
But they hijacked the world community by
sarcastically, But tell me something. Have you any idea how many foreign troops there are in Libya today?
Well,
it's a secret.
It's a secret, but they say this government is being brought in just to allow for more foreign troops to come into Libya. And the number has been circulated amongst journalists around the world today who pay attention to the Libyan. And there are very few, by the way. The Libyan situation is completely put on the backstage. I mean, you hardly get in interviews with Libyans who have different points of view about Libya at all today. You don't even get calls. Before 2011, my phone never really stopped ringing. Today, I don't get any calls. So they mentioned that amongst those, we can call them like, experts. They say there's a number about 6,000 troops are now prepared to really come to Libya.
These are British and French, or
British and French and Americans.
And Americans.
But a lot of people think that the British are taking the lead on this situation, and the Italians, and the Italians as well. And there's actually a
so they'll be under NATO command, obviously.
Yeah, the umbrella will be NATO. Of course, everything happens in this part of the world. The umbrella is NATO, but I mean, they're using NATO. I mean, these troops are their commands are gonna be to allegiance to their own countries. So, I mean, the British troops will be controlled by Britain.
Yeah,
and this is one of the problems. Is like all the French and the British and the Americans are not really on the same page when it comes to Libya.
So explain that.
Sorry?
Explain that.
This started from the beginning. I mean, even in the White House, Clinton is the one who led the war to Libya. Clinton was in every war, actually, the recent wars, starting from the Iraq war to Syria to Libya. She's a warmonger. So from the beginning, there was a fight over soft power as supposed to having boots in the...
Because Obama has said that he was pressured by the French and the British into going into Libya, which is true.
Yes.
But his own Secretary of State and the State Department was solidly involved.
Absolutely. He missed this out. He didn't want to mention because he wanted to blame the British. And he actually called Cameron to call them unfavorably. He thought of him as sleeping on the switch, and he wasn't paying attention. This is actually the quote he used. He said Cameron was not paying attention. I mean, how can you not pay attention when, if you look at Libya today, is being completely destroyed? I mean, how would Libyans feel when they hear Obama saying the head of the British government was not paying attention to what's going on in Libya? How can you send bombs to a country you're not paying attention to what's going on? As for the case with France, I mean, Sarkozy had a personal issue with Gaddafi. Everybody knows this. I mean,
we know this, but this government is carrying on in the same old way.
This government is it's almost clumsy in the way they're doing things. It's just, they're supporting the militias in Misrata to tackle the ISIS in Sirte. The ISIS in Sirte are not really the ISIS you think of as in Iraq.
Yeah.
The ISIS in Sirte are the people who got their houses stolen. They've been humiliated in front of their wives and families and mothers and brothers, and they were looking for something because they had no weapons to defend themselves against the militia from Misrata when the militia from Misrata invaded Sirte. So they looked for something, they found ISIS, so they just joined ISIS so they can have weapons, so they can get even with the militias. And now they're called ISIS. And the British, without studying this situation and see how complicated it is and trying to figure out something, because they're not really actual ISIS, they're just basically the term closest to them, they're freedom fighters.
Yeah.
But supporting the militias that today, it's another mistake. It's one of the compounding mistakes you keep adding on. And
well, they've created the militias in the first place, exactly. And now they're supporting them.
They're supporting them.
And different countries are getting attached to different militias. Exactly.
Qatar is supporting the Tripolis militia. The French are behind the militias in the south of Libya and in eastern Libya. Actually, the French pulled back a little bit. They're not really being proactive since Sarkozy left the government, and the new government doesn't really care much about Libya. So really, it's between the British and the Americans. So the problem today is actually between the Americans are leading. Their way of dealing with Libya is through their puppets in the Gulf area, which is the Qataris and the Emirates. So everybody's subsidizing different clown in Libya. That's the only term I can use.
I know.
They're not really meeting to discuss how to deal with the political situation. There's a news came yesterday that the British ambassador is calling for a meeting, economic meeting of the Friends of Libya in Tunisia in the next couple of days. And this is again, it's almost, they're making mockery of every decision, everything about Libya, and they're making mockery of the way they're trying to school Libya about democracy and all that. This meeting is really to what can we gain out of Libya with a semi-stable government, a government that it's going to be in a green zone in Tripoli, the militias around it, so they cannot really even move in their own city. So, and they're going to make business with this government. Basically, they just need signatures so they can go into oil fields and do things. And,
I mean, basically, it's a really weird situation because what we are witnessing is a recolonization of Libya by the Western powers, but in a situation where they do not actually control the territory directly and have to deal with the militias. And the deals then, the only way to conduct these deals is with money, and big money at that.
Yeah, well, it's a fantastic chaos. It's the chaos that does not really impact you directly as a European, although it's really like when it comes to migration and everything, Europe really lost so much with the fall of Libya, because most of the migrants are now using the long Libyan beach to really come in, and the smuggling of humans from Africa, from Syria, from Tunisia, from Morocco, and through Libya to Europe. So, I mean, if you consider this is a bigger problem to Europe, Europe really lost a lot, but there's not much invested interest in the political situation in Libya and fixing it. They're using puppets that they know they're not able to make strategic decisions. Of course, in 2011, they destroyed the Libyan army completely. So when you destroy an army, you know that you can really move around with your militias. So there's nothing to protect the state. And they bombed all the infrastructures. When they destroyed the army, and this is another point, one day, I don't know, somebody has to go to jail for it, and the no-fly zone was not really to bomb the Libyan army, who were in their bases, basically. They were not really moving. So they hunt them by helicopters. It was like a mass murder of about 30,000 troops.
How many?
30,000.
30,000 troops.
30,000 troops were murdered, and they were not fighting back because they didn't have any anti-aircraft, and they were sleeping. And some of them were resting, some of them in the barricades, some of them in their bases, some of them were on posts, and they were murdered by NATO, and under the pretext that they're going to protect Benghazi from, Gaddafi. That was the initial line. And now, because of the emails that came out, it shows that even Clinton herself and her people knew that Gaddafi was not really going to do anything in Benghazi, and they just used it
as a pretext.
As a pretext, yeah.
And Clinton herself, her infamous words after Gaddafi was publicly lynched by some of the so-called militias, she said, we came, we saw, he died.
Yeah.
And this is the woman who could be President of the United States.
Yeah, she is the most dangerous person today in the political arena, in my view. Not dangerous for Libyans or anybody else, but mostly dangerous for Americans, because the Americans' lives have been lost in Iraq, in Syria, and in Libya. She's going to have another war. This is what Clinton is.
Let's not jump the gun, Mabruk. Maybe she won't win,
Let's
but
hope so,
it's looking likely. But tell me something. In this entire mess, are there any forces in Libya which are regrouping and trying to create something halfway decent in that country?
And this is what's keep us actually optimistic a little, because there are a lot of movements outside of Libya mostly, but a little inside Libya, because if you speak in Libya, you get shot. If you're a journalist and you even complained a little bit about something, even journalists part of the new regime, anti-Gaddafi regime, or whatever happens before, during Gaddafi, whatever you want to call it. If you say something, you get murdered. It's the last number I counted was 72 journalists were killed in the last 4 years. 72. Just because some of them just said something, that we disagree with something. So it's really, the movement inside Libya is very limited. But outside of Libya, there's a rise in awareness of what the West is doing in Libya.
You mean amongst Libyan exiles?
Most Libyan, yeah. And they've been organizing themselves in different political groups, very promising political groups. They're making connections. They're talking to the West as well. But now with the mistrust, a complete distrust of everything that's happening. And not many people talking to the British, of course. They consider the British to be, British government, to be a two-sided face, basically. They're saying something.
Yeah, perfidious Albion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're saying something to them, and they're saying something to somebody else. And this is where they walked away from talking to the British, even though I know some British officials who really mean well, but they've been taken over by the overall either not care or have a mean opinion. I don't know how to describe it really. It just their best interest lies with the destruction of Libya, or keeping Libya as it is. The status quo is good because it's we don't want to establish, we don't want Libya to be a powerful nation in this region.
No, obviously they don't want Libya to be an independent,
or even
sovereign
stable
state.
They don't want it. No.
They don't want it. On the other hand, purely out of economic needs and what their purpose in Libya is, which is the huge reserves of oil, even though the price of oil is down, it's still needed. They do want that, and for that they need a stable government, surely.
Well, that's what they need. This is the key thing. They need a stable government, and that's it.
Yeah.
But the stable government does not be effective. A stable government can be in a green zone, and this is what they're trying to do now.
But, so they can pretend there's a government.
Exactly. So they can, this small, well-protected government can ask for troops, and that will be legitimate. You know, you're not invading the country, basically. You're being invited in.
Yes.
So, this puppet government, whether they know it or not, the government, are going to be able to sign agreements, economic agreements. You can start building economic societies. The British government already started one. Instead of having political officials, the first thing they did is they built economic institution now between Libya and England. So yeah, this is...
So Mabruk, where are the bulk of Libyan exiles based? In Tunisia?
Tunisia and Egypt, basically.
And Egypt.
Yeah, Egypt has the most because they have, I mean, considering the situation in Egypt, they've been given leeway to move, and I mean, they're not allowed to have official organization, or there's no right to assembly.
Informal.
Yeah, but informally they've been allowed to move around and gather and have. The ones in Europe are few individuals who move around and talk to all those countries that they feel that they may have a say, or they may help.
So Mabruk, do you see any hope at all?
Yeah, but it looks longer. It's going to take a long time. As long as these actors, the Americans, and I mean, as long as the so-called Clintons of the world, who really do not have the best interests of the American people, but have the best interests of other nations, maybe, and I don't want to name them, who do not want to have Libya as a stable state, a stable government that can maybe one day become as dangerous as the one before. If we have actors like Clinton, they're always going to block anything that is going to block anything that's good coming to Libya. As long as we have people who are not paying attention, like Cameron government here, who really do not care, or they're not sleeping in the watch. They're letting somebody like Sarkozy really just play around, dealing with Libya as if it was a playground. As long as we have those, it's going to look bad, and it's going to look maybe worse. But we're hoping that Clinton and her people and the likes of Clinton will not come to power. We're hoping that people like Cameron will go away, somebody else who really wants to use the Foreign Office, or wants to use real policy, or want to engage Libya in a positive way, making a friend of Libya. The future of Libya is really having Libya as a friendliest, I mean, helping and building Libya is beneficial, political and economically to Britain. So if we don't have these people, I think the future could be better.
We will talk again, Mabruk. Thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.